Hello, I'm very sorry that I can't be with you today, that work takes me away. I would have loved the opportunity to be there in person, and I hope that some of the things I get to say now are provocative and helpful. Those of us who work in the arts are lucky enough to be part of something whose principal purpose is to help us learn about each other and about ourselves. And the arts do that by increasing empathy. That's how stories work. You get better at understanding what things are like for people who aren't you by your experience of their stories. And it seems to me that at a time of increasing atomization and fundamentalism and fear of the unknown and fear of the other, we can usefully look to the arts, and in particular the mass visual media, which has such an extraordinary reach, to counteract a lot of the narratives about otherness that we're hearing now, and the attacks on disability benefits, the attacks on the welfare state. I suppose the position I come from fundamentally is that there is no them and us. It's all us. As an actor, I've been involved in a number of, I suppose I'm known as a sort of frock-coated posh person in period drama mostly, and until quite recently those stories were not in any way diverse, using disabled and non-disabled actors, using actors of colour, and that is beginning to change, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But as a theatre director, and therefore an employer of actors, and as somebody who was artistic director of the Crucible Theatre for 2 years, I now have to take my responsibility as an employer seriously. And that's a useful place to be in this debate, because just as a writer can, I can change things. I suppose I'd like to start by thinking about the theatre, because there is, in the way theatre tells stories, a slightly less tiresomely literal version of art that means that, for instance, you can be a black father with a white child in a Shakespeare play and nobody will raise an eyebrow. And perhaps 20 years ago they would have raised an eyebrow. Certainly 50 years ago they would have done. The holy grail of storytelling in terms of disability, it seems to me, is, and by all means disagree, but is to make it ordinary, so that the portrayal of disability specifically as the focus of the story, as a sort of triumph over adversity kind of thing, as a sort of empathetic tourism that allows you to visit a place and then go away from it and, you know, drink a sherry and have a meal and not really think about it anymore, is only the first step in a journey that, you know, is really only just beginning, but has a long way to go. And I would speak to those who have the power to create stories. My partner, Laura Wade, the writer, is going to be speaking later, and they are the true creators, and say, and I'm sure I'm not telling her anything she doesn't know, that truly integrated casting means not just saying we would prefer a person with a disability to play this disabled part, and we must see plenty of them for the role, but here is a part played by somebody with a disability which has no relevance to the story. Just a really good actor, this part can be played by a disabled or non-disabled actor, and here is our imaginative contribution to the debate. It's not a story, it's ordinary. It's common. I don't like using the word normal. It's common. And we know that it is common if we're talking about 20% of the population. And I think we're quite a long way from that. But again, I would say go back to the theatre and say a lot of the casting debate, particularly in big films, centres around casting directors who just won't make these progressive integrated decisions. And I don't think it's fair to make casting directors the villains of the piece. A lot of the time producers won't allow them not to cast a star because they don't think they'll sell tickets. And we must also remember that non-disabled actors have given very good performances in disabled roles in the past, and they may not have wanted to do that, but they did it to the best of their ability. I think that, I hope that is changing that culture. But perhaps if you go back to the theatre because the commercial pressures aren't quite so great, then the differences in casting there are still quite shocking. I don't know the figures for Britain, but in the last 2 seasons on Broadway there have been 7 roles in Broadway shows for characters with disability, and none of them were played by actors with disabilities. And the first actor to use a wheelchair to appear in a Broadway show of any kind happened last year, which is pretty shocking. And as he was first to say, this has got to be a start. It's we've got to start somewhere, and it's here. I must say, and I don't want to make too many parallels, but as somebody who works in period drama, and as Richard was pointing out just before we started filming, if you go in, an external scene in a period drama will be extremely white, it won't have any children in, and it won't have any disabled people in either. And none of that is historically accurate. I mean, if you need to be completely historically accurate, it's nonsense. Danny Lee Winter, a black actor, watched a 2.5-minute trailer for ITV drama, which included Mr. Selfridge, a show that I was in, a couple of years ago, and there wasn't a single person of colour in it. And he wrote to ITV and said, this isn't on, this is not okay. And he's a brilliantly vociferous and forceful person. He formed this group called Act for Change, and quite quickly afterwards, ITV agreed to a 15% quota in its drama. I've just done the Frankenstein Chronicles, where 2 of the principal 10 cast were played by black actors, in an area, 19th century London police, where I think we're fairly certain to say that there weren't any black officers. So it's not narrowly historically accurate, and it doesn't matter. And for black actors who looked at Mr. Selfridge and thought, well, I'm not going to be in that, it's an extremely important message. This season we have 2 principal parts played by actors of colour, and last season it was 1, and that's still not very many, but it's a start. And you can't be what you don't see. You can't say that the opportunities don't exist when you've got an opportunity to make them. You can't say that there aren't actors who are good enough if you don't give them the chance to get better. And so we look to every opportunity in the theatre where an imaginative leap can be made, a challenge to one's own prejudice can be made in order to decrease the feeling of otherness and increase the feeling of empathy. We look to every producer to be more imaginative. Nobody really knows what the public wants, so don't try and gainsay them. Make the best thing you can and make it as open and diverse as possible. And in that way, I think we'll see the position we're in now as backward looking and faltering as blacking up was 50 years ago. I hope so.